Hi, I'm Oliver and this is Deep Cuts, a channel dedicated to music for lovers of music. Just a quick one before I start the video. If the lighting keeps going strange, it's because I'm sitting next to a window and the sun is irritatingly going in and out of clouds as we speak. So it's nothing to do with the camera or anything, and I'm sorry if it's a bit annoying, but it was the only opportunity I had to film today. So blame the sun. So, since this past week, the music world has been set ablaze with rumour milling, hyping, and anticipation for a little-known record called Damn. You might have heard of it. I thought it would be a good time to do a discussion video. So the question I'm putting out today for discussion is, does hype increase your enjoyment of being a music fan? Hype is something that all of us experience as fans of pretty much anything, really. If you just look at the latest Star Wars trailer, the endless reaction videos online, the speculation, the kind of foaming at the mouth that you get from what is essentially 40 seconds of new footage. And I know many of you have been involved in the hype machine over the past week because we all expected Kendrick Lamar's Damn to be released on April the 7th, and it didn't, so we had a whole week of speculation, hype, and anticipation. I integrated myself into this hype too. I set up a listening party and some of you came and joined me. I was sat here 5 AM on Friday morning, bleary-eyed in a dressing gown, so I could listen to Damn at its earliest and discuss it with you guys who are also fans, and it was a really enjoyable experience. It was a hell of a lot of fun actually, and as a side note, I will be doing these again in the future, these listening parties for anticipated releases, so if you have an interest in being involved next time, make sure you follow me on Twitter for updates. The point is, for the most part, I find the anticipation and the hyping of records a really exciting thing to be part of. There's nothing quite like searching for minute clues, discussing them with other fans, trying to find little clues as to what the next sound or direction might be, or what the thematic content of the album might be, or seeing postings of Redditors promising they'll eat certain objects if things are or aren't done. But on the flip side, do you think hype negatively affects your experience as a listener in some way? Hype itself has a long history of associating itself with music criticism. Devon Powers, who's a professor of music and of culture, wrote a very interesting article in the Popular Music and Society journal about this and the way that hype affects our approach to music. He posits two different opinions on the effects of hype. One as a way of creating meaning and exposing an artist to a larger audience. Two, hype's ability to create a positive feedback loop, which is kind of self-inflating and can obfuscate people's individual responses on a piece of music or a piece of art. The number of times I've found myself listening to a record that's hyped to the moon, really enjoying the first listen and feeling like it really reached that hype, only to experience a real period of disillusionment after that when I begin to listen to the record more and realise that it actually hasn't managed to live up to those lofty expectations that hype churned out in the first place. So this next section isn't very scientific at all. What I've done is I've taken the technology hype cycle, which was something that was generated to try and explain the life cycle of hyped technology, future technology. It does apply quite well though to hyped music and hyped art, so I've done that, but I have changed the phase names to fit what I'm trying to say. So yeah, I don't think this will be found in any journals in the future because it's not exactly the most well planned out thing, but hopefully it'll help illustrate the point I'm trying to make. You'll see that more or less the most hyped projects go through a similar kind of life cycle when it comes to people's approach to the art and their criticisms, their initial responses, and then perhaps their disillusionment after. Number one, interest begins to emerge for a project, probably due to a buzz or an announcement or a rumour. Number two, just before the project drops, we have that peak of inflated expectations, that moment where people cannot wait to get their teeth into this piece of work. Number three, sometime after release, we reach the trough of disillusionment. That just sounds like a crappy fantasy novel, and I didn't change the name of that. That was from the original Technology Curve, so that wasn't me. This is the point where people start writing online, does anyone else think blah blah isn't that good? And all of a sudden you get a glut of people who are disillusioned by the project and decide they don't like it, probably because it hasn't reached the expectations of that initial hype. Number four, the slope of enlightenment. Still sounds like a crappy fantasy novel. And then at number five, we reach the plateau, which is kind of the point where people are now appreciating the work and acknowledging it for what it is, perhaps without that really inflated hype that was at the peak right at the beginning of this productivity curve thing that I've been trying to explain. So yeah, that wasn't the most scientific thing ever, but hopefully it illustrates in a way the way that hype can work and the way it can generate different responses at different times during the life cycle of that piece of work. And I think it's especially relevant now in our age of online and the internet, because back in the 80s, the 90s and earlier, the only places where reviews would be happening for music were by journalists in established places like newspapers. But now the response is ongoing and constant. So people will have their initial reactions, and you'll read them on forums and places like Reddit, Facebook, Twitter, and then that trough of disillusionment can happen because it spreads like wildfire, those opinions across different people going, oh, does anyone else think this actually isn't very good and the hype wasn't justified? And then you tend to see, as I say, that slope of enlightenment up to a trough where people then appreciate the music again. And I've just seen this happen now with so many album releases. It happened briefly with a Moon-Shaped Pool with Radiohead last year, although there wasn't such a trough because I think everyone acknowledged it. There was a whole load of fans around Frank Ocean's Blonde that were really unhappy and disappointed because they expected, because of the hype, they expected a Channel Orange Part 2, but they didn't get that. And then it took a while for the hype to die down for them to actually be able to appreciate the work. It happens all the time. People didn't like The Life of Pablo. You know, that was hyped to the hilt, and that was the artist's fault because he hyped it so much, and it was such a ridiculous release schedule where nothing really came out when it should, and it was all very staggered and confused. But I think this curve is so much more prevalent in our online society, in our contemporary society, because we're constantly reacting to this music, this art, and we're constantly being able to analyze it and critique it together. So as much as we all tend to really enjoy the anticipation and the hype, I would argue that inevitably that hype affects our listening experience and our approach to the music, especially initially. But I suppose the actual discussion point really to put forward is, does that really matter? If hype does affect our experience or our initial experience of listening to a piece of music, does that matter in the long run? In the case of DAMN, there was a lot less time for the album to be hyped up, and we had the Heart Part 4, which said you've got till April the 7th to get your shit together. On April the 7th, the album was announced, and then April the 14th, we got the album. So that wasn't much time. If you compare that to something like Blonde last year, that was bubbling under the surface for over a year before it finally dropped. But actually, the existence of DAMN has already taken on a different kind of life cycle, and I think a lot of fans probably will experience or have experienced that trough of disillusionment. And that's down to fan speculation and rumour. I'm sure you've all heard at this point because it was reported on by loads of news outlets over the weekend, but that a lot of fans had themselves convinced that Kendrick would be dropping a second album on Sunday. So we would have a companion album to go with DAMN. Some people thought it might be called Nation. Some people thought it might be called God, so we'd have God Damn or Damn Nation. And they were based on some fairly tenuous links that people had decided were pretty, it meant that we were going to get an album imminently, when obviously it didn't happen. People thought it was going to reveal a more intricately crafted project, maybe something that would further enlighten the themes that are on DAMN as a record itself. So much so that the discussion online on Friday in certain areas was geared more towards the speculation of a second album release than it was the album that we'd already just received. You know, some people on Twitter and Reddit were saying things like, I don't think I can even embrace the record fully until I know if there is a second album. Of course it didn't drop, and now it's very funny to read some of these theories. Now you know that it wasn't going to happen, especially some of the ones that were on the Kendrick Lamar subreddit. That was a little bit of an insane place on about Saturday morning. But it leads me to wonder what happens to DAMN now as a record for the people that were banking on a second release. That self-generated hype completely encompassed some fans to the point where there was a real sense of disappointment when another album wasn't dropped on Sunday. And I wonder now how that's going to affect their listening experience moving forward listening to DAMN. Are they going to feel a tinge of resentment every time because they really had their hopes up on getting that second album and it doesn't exist? And this is the thing about hype, it can really affect things, and this hype has been generated just through fan speculation and rumour, and I think about a lot of those fans would probably be happy with the record if they just sat and listened to it. But everyone got so wrapped up in the idea of there being a second album, and it was a lot of fun to read the ideas and the rumours and the theories, but in the end, has that now affected DAMN as a record for those people? I didn't really subscribe to any of the second album theories, although I did read a lot of them, but I want to hear from some of you that did subscribe to those ideas and you were really sure that another record was coming out. What is your response to DAMN now in light of the fact there hasn't been a companion record released? Some people have said to me in the past they actually try and actively avoid hype. They go dark on certain parts of the internet. They don't want to hear anything. They try and stay away from fan theories and speculations. But I want to know, does that actually work if you try and do that? Or does the fact that you're aware of the hype existing still alter your expectations in some way? So because I've rambled through this video, I've asked a few different questions. I'm just going to list a few questions to get the discussions going. Number 1, do you enjoy hype? 2, do you think it affects your listening experience positively or negatively? 3, is hype an inevitable facet of being a fan of anything? 4, do you try and avoid hype, and does it work? Obviously, you don't have to answer all of these questions. It's not a test. You don't have to answer any of the questions if you don't want to. I just put them there to make sure the conversation starts and flows. Let me know your thoughts, and I will see you in the comment section down below.